The two brothers approached their father, but only Riley remained behind, standing in the shadows with a look of concern. The first son, filled with horror and disbelief, demanded to know who had dared to inflict such harm on his father. His anger was so intense that his veins throbbed on his forehead, throbbing with fury. Lloyd, equally shocked, rushed to his father's side, asking in a shaky voice if he was okay. Although the answer was painfully obvious, Riley remained speechless, unable to find the words to express his feelings. The Count looked terribly thin, a mere shadow of his former self. However, it was not the focus of his current problem. He hung a poster of Cabal and informed his children that he had encountered a mercenary on the battlefield. This mercenary was known for his extraordinary strength. Repeating himself for emphasis, the father told his sons that the mercenary's name was Cabal, and that he led his own formidable band of warriors. Riley listened attentively to his father's story, remembering the events that occurred when they returned from Rhinefield. He remembered Cabal vividly. The man's face was unforgettable. Count Ipieta spoke of Cabal's exceptional abilities. He mentioned that in battle, when Cabal wielded his weapon, a whirlwind seemed to follow each of his blows. Finn faced Cabal head-on, trying to mount a counterattack, but the battlefield was a horrific scene, covered in blood and littered with the bodies of fallen knights. Only Cabal remained strong amid the chaos, an incredibly powerful warrior. Despite his decreasing strength, Finn fought bravely against him, his eyes full of determination. Soon, Cabal's heavy hammer came down on the Count's arm, the weapon stained and dripping with another man's blood. Count Ipieta reported, with great regret, that his arm was broken and his sleeve was soaked with blood. Their father explained that this is how he lost his arm. Riley was taken aback by these words, shocked and angered that his beloved father had been hurt. He felt a surge of rage because someone he loved had been hurt. For him, nothing else mattered. He always tried to stay out of other people's affairs, preferring to live his life with as few complications as possible. This incident, however, was different. He made a promise to himself that he would never let any member of his family die. Riley never imagined something like this would happen to his father. The Count admitted that his body was no longer what it used to be, and therefore the time had come to make an important decision. He declared that it was time to choose an heir for the Ipieta family. The carriage rolled through a forest filled with orange leaves, with Riley lying placidly on the roof of the vehicle. It was a rare moment of relaxation for the protagonist. Previously, the Count gathered his three sons in his office and informed them that in order to become the successor, they would need to complete a specific task. He explained that due to attacks by the Antrium gang along the borders, many villages in Solia were suffering. He tasked them with going to these villages to help the people, believing this would be their test. Nara ran towards young Riley, who was still on his way. She shouted that she had something urgent to tell him. As he approached, she asked if he remembered the priest who was with Oristan. He replied yes, noticing the priest's purple energy, similar to that of the scoundrel Cabal. Nara's words sent a shiver down the protagonist's spine, alerting him to a potential threat. He was convinced that there was something strange about this priest. He pondered whether it was the right time to choose an heir. Even as he lay on the roof of the carriage, they were told that the village they were going to had less than 100 inhabitants. The village was called Aliva and was surrounded by a dense, gloomy forest. Ian drove the carriage with an experienced hand and mentioned that there were recent rumors of orcs prowling the settlement. He felt that no one was listening, so he had to direct his question to the young gentleman. Although the young man was not particularly interested in what he said, he responded affirmatively, acknowledging Aliva's mention. Ian, the carriage driver, then asked, just to make sure he was heard, what the name of the town was, and Riley guessed her name was Olive. Ian quickly corrected her, saying that her name was actually Aliva. Riley eventually stood up and laughed, saying there was hardly any difference between the two names. Despite his attempt at humor, he felt a little embarrassed in front of old Ian. Ian laughed along with him, and the horses continued down the path. The golden autumn leaves fell softly from the trees, signaling the full arrival of the season. The beauty of autumn had already touched the landscape, and soon Riley's carriage arrived at the village of Aliva. Riley asked Han if that was all, and Han confirmed, saying that it was indeed Aliva. A man with blonde hair with a small cap was standing in front of the carriage. He was a short man, with a trembling voice. He began to ask the newcomers about their purpose, but was interrupted by Ian, who politely introduced them as the Ipiet family. This introduction seemed to please the old man, who was pleasantly surprised to learn that they were of the Ipiet family. He thanked them profusely and introduced himself as Molto, the village chief. When the young man approached him, the old man shook his hand and once again expressed his gratitude for the visit. Riley watched the exchange and suddenly commented, "Is this the place?" He turned to Ian and asked if he didn't find the situation a little oppressive. Indeed, the streets were eerily empty, creating a nightmarish atmosphere. Riley speculated that perhaps some villagers had gotten scared and decided to hide. However, the city seemed disturbingly deserted. Molto's expression grew sadder as he listened to Riley's remarks. He sadly admitted that Riley was right. Malta revealed that 10 people from the town had recently disappeared. Riley intervened, asking the old man to explain further. He said it all started 4 days ago. Initially, only one couple disappeared. However, the number of missing people soon included children. The protagonist, deeply concerned, specifically asked about the children. Then, he got out of the carriage, commenting on the seriousness of the situation. He thought that it was evident that he would now have to deal not only with the orcs, but also with the mysterious disappearances of the children. Memories of his past life resurfaced, reminding him of children abandoned in the heart of the city during a time of chaos. At that time, everything was on fire: cars, buses, in ordinary houses. The children, lost and covered in blood, looked like zombies, with their eyes bleeding. The protagonist used his magic on them, and it glowed brightly, healing them. His eyes returned to their normal state, and the blood drained. A little child asked his uncle who he was. The protagonist called the child a fool and told him to look at the sword he was holding. The children were amazed at the sword and asked if their uncle was a warrior. This question, for some reason, greatly irritated the protagonist, who abruptly confirmed that he was indeed a warrior. The children were thrilled with this revelation. A small girl exclaimed that it was true, increasing their excitement. He asked if he had come to kill them. In the background, another child was crying because he missed his mother. The same girl approached her uncle and said that they only had one request. In her eyes, he saw the sincerity and innocence of a child, but she asked him to end their suffering. She begged him to kill them. The children told their uncle that they were in excruciating pain. They begged him to kill them, to end their suffering quickly, to mutilate them, so that they would no longer suffer. They wanted to die without pain and without any more effort. That was their only request. And Raleigh, despite his inner turmoil, did as they asked. Whether he regretted it or not remains unknown, but it was clear that he did not feel comfortable taking the lives of innocent children. Ian called after him, pulling Riley from his dark thoughts. Riley turned around, surprised, and asked what was going on. The old man then asked how he planned to look for the missing children. The protagonist admitted that he still didn't have a plan. Malto decided to intervene, stating that the situation was complex and that they might not find any trace of the disappearance. They probably knew that orcs roaming the forests wouldn't help solve the case. Riley scratched his head, acknowledging that it was a nuisance, but something to consider based on the village chief's words. He noted that children began disappearing 4 days ago, one by one, rather than all at once. This suggested that if the children were still around, they would probably be in the vicinity of the village. He became much more serious and, with a grim expression, contemplated the fate of the villagers. In fact, he speculated that orcs had kidnapped and tormented the children. When told they needed to kill the orcs immediately, Malto was scandalized by Raleigh's reaction. However, Raleigh remained determined to act seriously and had already prepared his sword. The old man shouted for the young lord to have mercy on them. Despite this, Riley was resolute and kept his sword ready. The old man even fell to the ground in horror. Riley asked what the old man was doing. Malta, confused, questioned what he meant by that, asking if he hadn't said he would kill all the villagers. Confused, Riley asked what he was talking about. Ian looked critically at his young master, thinking he was foolish, because from the way he had spoken, it was obvious that Malta would get it wrong. Riley decided to ignore the confusion. He stated that he would save the children from the orcs. Ian asked if he was going to be okay, and Riley questioned what he meant. So Ian explained that he had picked up a sword. Riley remembered that he had always said he would start using it one day, so he asked what was going on. Ian acknowledged that it was true, but this situation was very dangerous. The protagonist told him that if that was the case, Ian should be watching his back. The old man laughed and said he would do his best. Malto shouted for them to be careful. Riley and Ian continued at full speed, with Riley telling the old man that he was going to speed up. Shortly afterwards, the young man managed to walk away. Riley deftly jumped to the high branches of a wide tree, but Ian was still at the base, unable to follow. Riley leapt nimbly from branch to branch, confident that he would finish off the orcs before they had time to blink. With determination, the protagonist jumped from a high branch, flying directly towards the orcs, while old Ian shouted warnings about the danger. Riley felt no sense of danger as he quickly eliminated the monsters, cutting off their heads or passing through their bodies with ease. Ian was amazed at the speed and agility of his young master, Riley. He knew that no one else in the family or among his allies moved so quickly. Suddenly, someone telepathically communicated with Ian, urging him to move. When another orc head flew out, Ian was surprised. He wondered if the telepathic message was a vision, but quickly questioned how his master had mastered such an advanced skill. Turning his focus to the battle, he counted the dead orcs. The number had already reached 34. Now, Raleigh, having defeated the first wave of monsters and lying in a pool of their blood, waited for the next group of orcs. Ian rushed to confirm that the village leader had mentioned that there were around 150 orcs in total. The protagonist pointed out that some creatures were missing, surprising Ian. Ian asked for clarification, insisting there was no way that was possible. Suddenly, a large and fierce orc appeared behind the old mercenary hero, frightening them both. This orc, unlike the others, could speak. He whispered threateningly that these men had killed his companions and shouted that he would avenge them. Meanwhile, the orcs in the settlement shouted that they were under attack and demanded that the gates be opened to allow reinforcements to enter. Ian observed Raleigh, who had now reached the count of 90 orcs killed. It was clear that the young man was going through a challenging battle. He realized that his sword wouldn't last much longer, and the most important thing now was to find the missing children as quickly as possible. The orcs guarding the entrance to the settlement noticed someone approaching. One of them asked the other how someone could have arrived so quickly. Raleigh, realizing that there were no children present, decided to look for signs of power in the area. He gathered his energy into a focused burst, reflecting on the situation. He tried to calm down, repeating words of relaxation. As he concentrated, Raleigh felt that there were 14 children. However, the energy was getting weak, and then he started running towards the aura, wishing he could get there in time. After a while, he arrived next to a tree with golden leaves because of autumn, and noticed that the aura he had felt before became even weaker, and the thought that the children had died crossed his mind, but he soon denied it, saying he didn't believe it. The mounds of clay on the cave walls looked grotesque, and there were also bodies of dead orcs scattered about. He wondered who had killed them. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared in the depths of the cave, and he wondered if she was human. In another part of the cave, a scared boy asked his sister if they would die there. The girl, determined to be strong, scolded him for saying such things. She reassured him, saying that the adults would come to save them, so he shouldn't worry. Other children were also there, tied with tight ropes. They whispered to each other that orcs were everywhere out there, increasing the sense of danger and urgency. The children's eyes, wide with fear, asked if the orcs would eat them, if they would die there. A blonde boy, covered in mud, looked up and asked Raleigh who he was. Raleigh stood erect in front of him and asked if the boy was addressing him. Without waiting for a response, Raleigh confidently declared that he was the man who had come to save them. The children exploded with excitement. They screamed in unison that he was the one, the man who had come to rescue them, the one who would keep them safe. Raleigh quickly asked if there was anyone else with them. The children shouted together that there was an epidemic. Raleigh, his curiosity piqued, asked what kind of epidemic they were talking about. A girl with bangs happily explained that it was a beggar who had hidden them in the cave and left something at the exit. Raleigh's interest was immediately piqued by the mention of a way out. He began searching all the walls of the cave, with the girl watching him closely. Eventually, he found a note addressed to the man who had come to help the children. The note was an apology from someone who said that, with their limited abilities, they had done everything they could to protect the children. It mentioned that some children had weak immune systems and could have contracted the plague, urging that they be taken to a healer as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the blonde boy complained to his sister that his leg was itchy. The girl, feeling the same discomfort, told him to hold on tight. The boy, feeling terribly uncomfortable, begged for relief. He screamed that he was tied up and couldn't scratch his leg alone. Raleigh watched this and thought of the man who had hidden them. All the children were complaining about itching, but the girl kept telling them to be patient. Raleigh knew he had to get them out of the cave and get them to safety. Finally, he managed to untie all the children and took them out of the cave where they were hiding. With a sigh of relief, he realized that they were all present. Suddenly, Ian appeared from behind, looking scared and shouting for the young master. Raleigh called Ian to come quickly. He told Ian that he had found the children and that they were safe, but mentioned that they were talking about an uncle and asked Ian who that person could be. The children then said that they agreed to be friends with this uncle. They described him as gentle, with long hair down to his navel. Despite their wide smiles, it was clear that they were still shaking with fear. Raleigh asked if there was anything else unusual about this man. One of the boys said yes, that the man wasn't breathing. These words shocked Raleigh, who asked the boy to repeat himself. The boy, with tears in his eyes, said the man was very scary and asked why Raleigh was speaking to him in such a stern tone. Raleigh apologized and gently asked if the boy could tell him more. The boy repeated that the man was not breathing and said he noticed it out of curiosity. The boy remembered standing next to the same white-haired man and asking him why he wasn't breathing. The man then wrote on the wall that if he breathed, everyone would be in danger. Raleigh assumed that those orcs had died because man had somehow taken the air from them. He recalled the rotting remains of the orcs, their skin turning purple, and wondered what could have caused such a thing. Changing scenes, where this uncle was, everyone felt a terrible stench. The uncle was worried about the children's safety. He left a trail behind, hoping it would help them find their way. The only thing he could do was hope they were okay. Someone called him out, calling him left leg. This someone took a decisive step, and it was none other than Cabal. He looked at his uncle in disbelief and said he didn't know he was in Solia. If I had known, I would have trusted Rebosa. The hooded girl next to him asked what he was wearing, apparently having forgotten what he was doing. The man with white hair and red eyes watched them silently. His eyes were tired and devoid of any positive emotion. Cabal shouted at him, telling him to put on a more pleasant expression. Cabal was annoyed that everyone in Antrium was looking for him, checking every neck. Suddenly, a nearby girl hit Cabal on the shoulder with her shield and told him to get out of the way. The uncle began to spread purple air throughout the space. The girl explained to Cabal that if this air trapped him, not even Rebosa could help him. The stranger's actions enraged Cabal, who demanded to know what the idiot was doing. He pointed out that of the 6 body parts, he was a leg, and questioned why he acted like a brute when he was supposed to be his partner. The white-haired man also got angry and told Cabal that he had no interest in his business with prayers or anything else, so he should leave him out of it. Cabal covered his nose with his hand, and the girl used a fan. She said that she disliked him from the beginning, and now raised her gun towards the white-haired boy. Finally, the children were reunited with their parents and relatives. The old man, Molto, expressed immense gratitude to the newcomers for rescuing the children and bringing them back safely. Raleigh advised the old man to take the children to the temple for examination and treatment. Molto agreed, saying they would go to the temple immediately. Molto then waved to the children and shouted that it was time to go. The children obeyed without further questions. They climbed onto the cart like normal children, pushing each other and asking each other to stop. They screamed about who and what started first. Only when the wagon with the children finally left did Raleigh breathe a sigh of relief and tell Ian that they had worked hard today. He said they deserved at least 2 days of rest. After that, Ian turned to his young master, but he didn't immediately say what he had in mind, so Raleigh had to ask what was wrong. Ian explained that he always wanted to ask about the sword. He pointed out that Raleigh had never trained with a sword or even held one before. Ian asked Raleigh how he had learned such a remarkable skill. Raleigh, with a calm demeanor, responded that it came naturally, as if he had visualized the movements in his head and then was able to execute them. His response left the mercenary hero stunned and speechless, imagining the elaborate sword fights that Raleigh must have constructed in his mind. Ian then inquired about the mana. He mentioned that Raleigh had recently sent him a vision. Raleigh, slightly confused, asked Ian about his leadership and what it meant. Ian laughed, which enraged Raleigh, who shouted at the knight, demanding to know what he wanted. Ian confessed that he didn't know what Raleigh was hiding, but he always believed him. Ian's emotions came out, and it was as if roses were blooming around him as he cried. Raleigh was uncomfortable with Ian's behavior, wondering why he was so emotionally involved. Suddenly, a large black bird with yellow eyes flew over Libby's settlement. He had a ribbon tied around his leg, signaling to Raleigh that he was a messenger eagle. Ian extended his arm, and the eagle landed on it. He informed Raleigh that the eagle had been sent by Nara and handed him a note. Nara's message warned that enemies were approaching and that Reinfeld's dark magician had survived. This news alarmed Raleigh, and Ian asked what it meant. Raleigh remembered Bishop Rebosa's face and how suspicious this situation seemed, especially regarding Rebosa. Raleigh had recently asked Nara to investigate Rebosa, and now he received this troubling note. The Black Mage's survival did not please Raleigh. Ian, feeling ignored, asked again about what had happened at Reinfeld. Raleigh still didn't respond, making Ian wonder if his master was hiding something from him again. Raleigh turned and asked Ian what he was talking about. Ian insisted that the young master knew exactly what he meant, and Raleigh remained silent. Ian, becoming frustrated, ran up to Raleigh and began shaking him by the shoulders, calling his name repeatedly. Raleigh screamed that his head was going to fall off. Raleigh tried to reassure Ian that it was nothing serious, but his efforts were futile. Ian, now red with anger, demanded to know the truth, saying he wanted to hear it no matter what. An hour later, Raleigh finally explained what had happened at Reinfeld, stating that whether Ian believed it or not, he had told him everything he needed to know, and Ian replied seriously that he believed him. Raleigh was a little surprised by this, but recognized that it was a good thing. Then Ian grabbed Raleigh by the shoulder and insisted he had to make a decision. Raleigh, still confused, asked what else Ian wanted. Ian then questioned what they should do to get back to the center of Solia, explaining that if the note was accurate, they needed to leave immediately. Raleigh smiled and reminded Ian that his father hadn't yet decided who the heir would be. He asked if Ian thought they could leave so suddenly when the family's fate was still undecided. Ian, absorbing the gravity of the situation, said that they would find the black-caped villain immediately and kill him. He asked if there was anything more important than that mission. Raleigh nodded in agreement, acknowledging that they needed to go. They headed towards the carriage that had brought them to the village of Alava. Ian had been eagerly waiting for a long time, hoping that Raleigh would become the official heir of the Ipieta family. But now, without hesitation, Raleigh had given up the most coveted position and was heading off in a different direction. Ian wasn't sure if there was a cause more important than becoming the heir, but this mission gave him strength at that moment. Stopping a black magician who killed and abused people was much more critical for him. In other words, human life always came first. Raleigh fell deeper into his thoughts. He realized that although he was hurting his family by leaving, he valued the precious time he had spent with them and missed it dearly. The room was dimly lit, with beautiful lamps hanging from the wooden ceiling. Although they provided little illumination, orcs, elves, and other creatures were sitting around a large round wooden table. They were reminiscing, asking each other how long it had been since their last meeting, which had been 1,000 years ago. Suddenly, someone commented on how time flies. The green orc asked where Endal was. The elf girl replied that he had not arrived yet. She mentioned that Endal had said he needed to find an apprentice and that they should wait. Someone asked who the apprentice was. Fish girl explained that humans called people who were learning something apprentices. The orc laughed at Endal's peculiar behavior. At that moment, the red-haired Endal burst into the room, shouting at the orc that he was a weird insect. Nani followed him, complaining of not being used to Rainfield's humid air. He walked over to the table, where there were 2 empty seats. Endal asked what the seats were for, surprised to see them all there. Someone replied that there was still one person missing. Endal, slightly surprised, asked why this person was not present. Elf girl explained that she was unable to contact him, and Leo was also absent. The girl then asked about the stranger who had come with Endal. Nani asked if it was about her, asking for her name. Endal referred to her as the apprentice, and the girl confirmed it. The orc laughed and said he would like to see a fight between his guard and the girl. The tree asked him to stop, pointing out that she could barely walk normally and was completely weak. Endal retorted, telling the tree not to underestimate her, stating that his guards wouldn't even be able to touch her little finger. The green orc laughed and accused Endal of having learned to lie in the last 1,000 years. Endal laughed back and asked if she thought that was a lie. He then announced, "She can easily face 5 high elves." This statement alarmed one of the girls, and the elf told them to stop fighting, saying that Endal had brought them together for another reason. She explained that the reason for the meeting was that she had felt a strange energy in that place. Another girl asked about the nature of this strange energy. The tree-like figure asked why she was causing a disturbance, wanting to know what the problem was. The elf clarified that this had happened a few days ago. The girl repeated her question, asking why there was such a commotion. The elf reiterated that this had happened a few days ago. The tree-like figure questioned why the strange energy had been felt in that place, describing it as an unpleasant sensation. She described people in the library with blood pouring from their eyes, affected by a dark energy. Another girl suggested that Ed was something similar to Mana, but it wasn't exactly the same thing. When Rebosa placed his hand over the blackened remains, he looked at them with contempt. Someone asked if there was more to the story. "No," she replied. The elf compared the energy to Mana, but noted that it was much darker and negative. She revealed that only 3 individuals possessed this energy, all located in Rainfield. A large candle burned in front of the girl as she continued, saying that if she hadn't seen it with her own eyes using her spiritual powers, she wouldn't have believed it either. Endal sat down, with Nani by his side. The tree-like man asked the elf if that was the only reason for the meeting. The orc supported his question, asking if it was something significant. He commented that there was nothing wrong with 3 people wandering around. The girl responded that she believed they were threatening the balance, which surprised and worried Fish Girl. She asked what the elf meant by that. The elf explained that these individuals interfered in matters of life and death, deciding people's destinies. This statement alarmed not only the orc, but also Fish Girl. She slammed her hand on the table, shouting that idiots were acting rashly. This scared Nani, so the girl clarified that with her spiritual powers, she had seen the past and witnessed the events. She asked Nani to tell her what happened that day. Nani, drenched in cold sweat, began her story. She vividly remembered the rainy day, with a flashlight lighting her way. She described meeting a black mage, the one with the black cape and purple mana. Nani stretched out her hand, and the black magic began to waver. Nani explained that the wizard possessed the same dark purple mana as Ella, using it to animate corpses and control them like puppets. The tree-like man sighed and commented that this was a skill, not something unusual. He mentioned that his dragon could also perform such feats with ease. The elf acknowledged this, but pointed out that the issue at hand was the human soul. At this point, Fish Girl intervened, her eyes wide with horror. She asked if they were implying that the wizard not only controlled bodies, but could completely resurrect a person. Seeing her despair, everyone advised her to remain calm and listen until the end. Nani resumed her story, mentioning that Mr. Rolly managed to kill the black wizard, causing all the animated bodies to disappear. After sharing this, the elf turned the conversation to Nani's eye, stating that she was said to have the power to locate a person. Nani confirmed this, prompting the elf to ask what would happen to the dead if she found him. The girl then suggested rephrasing the question. She asked where the black mage was now. Nani's silver eye widened, revealing a deep purple layer surrounding the tall man. Nani held her injured eye, perplexed by what was happening. Unable to fully comprehend the situation, it seemed impossible. Meanwhile, Ian was beside the horses, and Raleigh suggested they eat first. Ian, worried about the urgency, said he thought it was better to hurry. given the situation. He asked if the current mission wasn't more important than food. Raleigh agreed, but pointed out that they needed to be well prepared for the journey, which included being well fed, so they headed down the road, past the market. As they walked, Raleigh mentioned that he was now officially competing for the title of heir, which meant he needed to act with caution and discretion. Some people were sitting at tables while others examined the merchandise. Raleigh, however, focused on walking through the market. Suddenly, he noticed a bank with masks, which took him by surprise. He remembered Nani putting on a mask and smiling genuinely when she looked in the mirror. Raleigh did not understand why this memory resurfaced so suddenly. Han looked directly at Raleigh's face and asked if he was sick because his face was flushed. Raleigh, irritated, shouted that he was fine. He then took 2 similar masks and asked the seller to sell them. The salesman, with a big smile, exclaimed that Raleigh had made a great choice. Raleigh simply replied that the masks would be useful and threw a black mask with a feather to Ian. Ian accepted the mask. When Raleigh was about to leave, Ian called him, telling him to wait. The protagonist, as usual, asked what else there could be. Ian pointed with a white-gloved finger somewhere, and Raleigh turned away, feeling disappointed. They saw a group of people wearing cloaks, which greatly surprised Raleigh. He paid particular attention to the first one, a boy with white hair and glasses who asked if he was Ferda. Han confirmed that it was him and noted how anxious he looked. Raleigh asked Ian if they were going to the lower part of Solia. Ian replied that, judging by the direction they were going, it seemed so. Raleigh suggested they watch what was going on, and Ian agreed. The blue-cloaked individuals announced that they were from the Wizard's Tower and asked the inhabitants to disperse. The inhabitants retreated in different directions, surprised by the request, but obeyed. Raleigh and Ian watched from a corner as the group headed towards a dark, descending staircase, where a shadowy energy swirled ominously. The stairs were intimidating and shrouded in darkness. The boys asked what was down there, wondering if it was a beast emitting dark energy. Ferda quickly ordered his men out of the area. Following his order, all the boys lined up and shouted warnings to the people, urging them to leave immediately. They repeatedly emphasized the danger, making it clear that the situation was very dangerous. Someone grabbed a stone slab, leaving a pool of blood on it. Although it was a human hand, the person grunted like a beast. It was a bald man, with bloody eyes and mouth, who ran upstairs screaming, leaving a trail of blood behind him. People prayed to God and wondered in horror what that creature was. The scene was truly terrifying. Ferda used her magic, making countless plants and vines sprout around her. He shouted for everyone to move away, desperately urging residents to retreat. Ferda directed her vines towards the strange man, wrapping him tightly. As he did so, he wondered if the man was still human and why he had turned like this. Suddenly, more people appeared from below, all looking like the first man. The other wizards shouted to Mr. Ferda, warning him that even more were coming. Ian, drenched in sweat, was horrified by the sight. However, Raleigh was more interested in the moving bodies and suggested they find Nara first. Ferda struggled to maintain her line, blocking the hallway and entangling the stairs with her vines. The eyes of the dead now glowed red, and their bodies seemed to disappear, leaving only silhouettes. Meanwhile, Bishop Rebosa met with the wizard that Raleigh had defeated earlier. Behind the bearded wizard was the spirit of Reinfeld's wizard. The spirit expressed his satisfaction with his new body. Now that he was in the body of a wizard, Rebosa insulted him, calling him deaf, and warned him not to lose any more limbs. The man accepted, noting that he could not die again and that it would be ungrateful to fail. The left-hand spirit, standing next to a trembling old man, told him to calm down, promising revenge with a wide smile. Bishop Rebosa pointed his hand at the pile of human bodies and invoked his power. People agonized in fire, magic and dirt, screaming loudly. Ferda's group of mages arrived at the same pile of bodies where Bishop Rebosa and the Black Mage had been. The stench was unbearable. One of the boys asked what had happened there, but despite his curiosity, no one was able to answer. Suddenly, someone shouted, calling the honorables and asking for permission. Ferda and her companions were surprised to see Bishop Rebosa and the Black Mage standing there with a menacing appearance. The boys were terrified and asked how the two had survived and what it all meant. Rebosa ordered the wizard to deal with the intruders, who seemed ready to fight. The group of mages found themselves surrounded by undead on all sides. Despite the imminent threat from the Black Mage and Rebosa, Ferda realized that the only option was to flee. They screamed that they needed to evacuate immediately as an army of corpses approached. Ferda decided that they needed to seek help from the Wizard's Tower and Solia Castle. Someone disagreed, saying this wouldn't work, and suddenly, a large black tentacle appeared in the sky, radiating purple energy. They realized they were not alone. The powerful and strong tentacles grabbed the blue-cloaked men by the legs and lifted them into the air. It was incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to break free. The Black Magician declared that it was time for lunch. Ferda charged forward and activated her magic, beginning to fight back. It seemed like a hopeless situation. But then everything burst into flames, surprising the black mage. Under the influence of Furta's fire magic, the tentacles began to release the mages and retreat. The black mage was furious and called Furta a troublesome ingrate. Rebosa commented that, normally, lunches didn't talk so much. Meanwhile, in a beautiful room, a dark stone sculpture stood out. The statue depicted a figure in a beautiful white dress, with a mask and a crown. A girl prayed to the goddess Idnessa, asking for guidance on how to deal with Rebosa and expressing her feelings of helplessness. She mentioned that even the dragon said she couldn't handle it alone. Finally, the goddess Idnessa responded to her daughter, which greatly pleased and comforted the girl, who was radiant upon hearing the goddess's voice. As if the statue had come to life, it seemed like everything had a purpose. The goddess told her that if she was lost and wandering, it would be worth finding the black butterfly. Idnessa said that the black butterfly child would help her find her way. Changing scenes, they asked Ian if he was okay. He said it didn't look good, but Ian remained silent. It was Nara who asked the most. Now that he is together with Ian and Riley, Nara asked if they had ever seen an invasion of corpses before. Riley responded that it was similar to what had happened in Rainfeld. He explained that these corpses had no mana. They moved on their own. Ian agreed, saying that Riley was right. While eating a sausage, Riley asked what was going on with Rebosa and what he had discovered. Nara reported that Rebosa did his temple work in the morning, traveled to Lower Solia, and returned in the late afternoon. Riley asked if Rebosa had been on Solia's bottom. Nara confirmed, saying yes. Ian remained silent, and Riley continued talking. Riley expressed his belief that there was some connection between Rebosa and the corpses. Finally, Ian decided to speak. He turned to Riley and said he had something to share. Riley asked him to explain further, and Ian explained that what they saw were not just dead bodies, but their eyes. Describing those black, empty eyes, the protagonist asked when this occurred. Ian began sharing more details, revealing that the incident happened 26 years ago, and that he still regrets it. At that time, Ian was young and full of vigor. One day, as a mercenary, he traveled to a village where a certain witch lived, a girl despised by society, with questionable purple energy emanating from her home. She, just like the corpses in Solia's lower half, had completely black eyes, and he thought that was why people called her a witch. But when he met her, he realized that they were just absurd rumors. During their encounters, young Ian discovered that he was skilled with a sword, which somewhat surprised Riley. Ian confirmed that the black-eyed girl taught him how to fight and became his mentor after he defeated her. When he asked her about her eyes, why they had darkened, Riley wanted to know what she had told him. Ian revealed that she said she received a blessing. This revelation surprised Ian at the time and has now sparked the protagonist's interest. The servant remembered that the girl had expressed that she did not want any blessing, that she did not need those eyes, and then she looked very sad. Ian remembered this clearly, and she had said that her power came from another world. These last words deeply shocked Riley. Ian, noticing Riley's condition, asked what was wrong with him. Suddenly, something surprised both Naru and Ian. The wizard tower was now literally split in two, raising a cloud of dust. Nara was in shock, screaming that it was true, that she had just passed out. Riley asked what she meant by fainting. Ian was next to the window. Looking out, Riley remembered Furta and wondered where that wizard was sleeping when the wizard tower fell. Ian mentioned that the biggest problem was where the tower had fallen. Riley asked where she had fallen. Ian responded with a trembling voice that had fallen upon the temple. He expressed his concern, saying that if he was not mistaken, the saint was praying there at that time. The protagonist put on a dark blue mask and asked what they should do. Riley said to go to the temple immediately. He looked terribly determined and shouted for everyone to hurry. Smoke and dust rose from the fallen tower. Many exhausted people, with torn clothes and undead, wandered the roads. The guards directed the common people, shouting at them to run in a specific direction where there was refuge. People ran as fast as they could, screaming and covering their heads from the falling rocks. A terrified girl saw a dead man approaching her slowly but inexorably. She begged for someone to save her. The masked Ian quickly threw a knife into the air and used his sword to lift the slab that had crushed the girl, freeing her. He asked if she was okay and told her to leave quickly. The girl thanked him but mentioned a baby. Realizing that the boy had also been crushed by the rock, Ian reassured her that he would take care of him. Suddenly, the girl pointed something at her savior's back and screamed. The sword cut through the air again. There seemed to be a girl under a dark hood. She had purple hair, and Ian placed his sword against her neck. The girl revealed her face. She was a saint of the temple. She asked the girl if she could remove the object from her. Ian, surprised to see a saint there, asked if she was okay. The saint, frustrated, asked Ian to remain quiet. She apologized, explaining that she didn't know who they were, but suggested they exchange vows later. Using divine magic, she lifted the block from the boy's feet. The saint then picked up the boy and asked if he could run. When she realized he could, she instructed him to run to the shelter. The boy happily thanked the stranger before he and his mother left. The saint turned to the masked trio Nara, Riley, and Han and said that she would first like to know who they were. And Ian spoke first, apologizing, but said he couldn't reveal their identities. The saint accepted this, recognizing that their actions in helping people were enough. Suddenly, dead men began flying towards the trio above. Riley easily took them on, destroying each one. He just exhaled as he did this. Inara, without wasting any time, also pierced a dead man with precision. The saint shouted that they shouldn't just kill the corpses. She activated her magic, making her hand glow with golden light. As the magic enveloped the corpses, they began to grunt loudly, their mouths opening simultaneously. One of the corpses coughed and grunted, its body shaking violently. Ian fought another dead man, trying to use the point of the sword instead of the sharp edge, struggling with the challenge of not killing them. The mages, now defeated, continued to summon fireballs and ice arrows, but a black liquid dripped from their eyes. Riley was dissatisfied that the dead were also using magic. Ian shouted to Riley that he'd better get out of there. Then, the black mage and Bishop Rebosa appeared. They mocked the group, saying that no one had allowed them to leave yet. The saint was deeply moved, but found herself speechless. She remembered how the wizard had been impaled, and as she lay there, devoid of strength or feelings, Riley was also shocked to see Astro. Riley called him a son of a bitch and demanded to know how he had survived, asking Rebosa if it was his doing. Rebosa smiled widely and told Uriel, the black magician, that it was time to use magic. Uriel, raging in Astro's body, called all the ungrateful creatures from behind. Using dark magic, Uriel squeezed Ferda, who screamed in pain. Uriel then threw Ferda to the ground. The saint ran to the boy and asked the trembling Ferda how he was. The wizard, barely holding himself up by his elbows, told her with his last strength that he was not Astroi, that there was another person in his body. Riley vividly remembered seeing Uriel standing on the cliff with his hands raised. At that moment, Riley recognized the terrifying energy, which surprised him. He wondered what the idiot was doing in Astroi's body. As he thought about this, the saint was horrified and asked Rebosa why he was with them. The scene was horrible. Bishop Rebosa looked like he had been skinned. He told the saint that it was not something she needed to know. He always wore makeup on his face, and without it, he looked disgusting. He shouted that everyone would die right then and there. Riley, seething with rage and confidence, removed his mask, declaring that Rebosa had finally shown his true face. He approached his opponents with sword in hand, ready for combat. One of Astro's magical hands was shaking violently, as the body had not yet adjusted to its new owner, and muscle memory persisted. Uriel commented that the body's reaction indicated that Astroi was killed by him. With a wide smile, Riley scratched his neck and confirmed the wizard's words, adding that he had indeed broken up with Astroi. Uriel, enraged, asked if Riley had already forgotten. These words enraged Uriel, who screamed in disbelief. He remembered the battle well, and it was unforgettable. Now, in Astroi's body, Uriel called the protagonist an ungrateful bastard, her eyes red with anger and hatred. Bishop Rebosa was also surprised to see the Lord there, not expecting to meet Riley. Even Ferda was surprised, wondering if it was the Ipid family. Rebosa laughed, confirming that it was himself, the Lord, and although he had guessed, he was still surprised. Ian also removed his mask, and he and Sandy listened intently to the bishop. The bishop commented that Riley was nicknamed the Lazy Swordsman because he seemed incapable of doing anything. But in truth, he was an exceptional swordsman. Rebosa smiled mischievously and added that unfortunately, the Lord had discovered his true identity, so he would have to kill him. Riley, unfazed, declared that he did not care. He wouldn't kill them, but he would thwart their plan to open the underworld, as that shouldn't happen. This revelation scared and tensed the Black Mage and Bishop Rebosa, who looked questioningly at the swordsman. Seeing their expressions, Riley was satisfied that he had guessed their intention. They were indeed planning something nefarious, so Uriah pointed accusingly at Riley, calling him scum and asking how he knew. Riley replied that it didn't matter, suggesting that if they left now it would be better. But before he could finish, he and his team were attacked by large, thick tentacles that entangled the men. Rebosa smiled widely and happily, asking if Riley thought he could protect everyone. Riley realized that he had been too careless and was now far from enjoying himself. He was about to retreat when a tentacle wrapped around his leg, and Uriel asked where he was going. Ferda got up, rekindled her flame, and shouted for everyone to run and save themselves. Zane was genuinely surprised by the turn of events. She turned around, realizing that she no longer had the necessary strength, which frustrated her immensely. The fire spun to attack, and Ian shouted for the saint to dodge the attacks. Protecting the saint was one of his main objectives. Despite this, the saint did not move. She just watched the scene with wide yellow eyes, her thoughts running wild. In her mind, she turned to the goddess Inosa, bitter, burning tears welling in her eyes. Wondering if these were the burdens she must bear, she remembered how the goddess had called her followers urging them to follow the black butterfly. As she remembered, the tentacles began to slowly dissolve, destroyed by the flames. Everything around them was burning, with sparks of fire and trails of purple energy rising into the air. One girl exclaimed, "Thank God I wasn't too late." The saint recognized the voice and finally opened her eyes to see Nani. She smiled widely and calmly at the saint, now looking much better than before. Santa Frisia didn't expect to see Nani there. Nani apologized to her master, explaining that her training had taken longer than expected. Riley was surprised to see Nani and wanted to say something but was speechless. Rebosa asked who the other girl was, and Uriel, horrified, asked if she was using the spatial inversion technique. The bishop asked about it, and Uriel explained that it was a magical technique that allowed the creation of a barrier, mastered only by magicians of the seventh circle. Ferda also recognized the spatial reversal and was amazed, knowing that she had reached the sixth circle only last spring. He couldn't believe that Nani had already advanced to the seventh circle. Ferda approached Nani and asked what had happened. Nani, breathing heavily, said that it had been a long time since he had seen Professor Ferda. He expressed a desire to talk more, but mentioned he had more pressing matters and apologized. Turning to Raleigh, he asked if the gentleman could briefly update him on the situation. Raleigh replied that the enemies were attacking, and Nani asked how they should proceed. Raleigh instructed him to suppress the zombies but not kill them, and deal with the other enemies as he saw fit. Nani threw herself into battle, holding an apple as a gift in one hand and her magic swirling in the other. Determined to deal with the threat quickly so they could return the apple to its owner, the zombies rushed to attack. They roared fiercely, looking extremely terrifying. Nani, now fully confident in her powers and herself, wielded her sword. She turned towards the monsters, killing them at her own pace, cutting through the air with her cold, magical weapons. As the girl's magic burned the zombies, they screamed and growled in agony. The pain was unbearable for them. Nani sat near Santa Frisia, watching everything closely, ready to attack and defend himself if necessary. The saint, perplexed, asked what was happening. All of Vism's mages wielded both ice and fire magic, fighting desperately, not for themselves, but for the safety of others. The saint shouted to Nani that the dead were using magic. Nani turned and extended her arm, releasing her own magic upon them. The mages, whose magic had begun to weaken, now grunted and coughed as Nani's powerful magic attacked them with a red-hot pillar. Nani's sword flew out from within the pillar and landed right in front of old Ian's face. Nani, turning to Ian, told him that the sword he had borrowed was very good, and Ian smiled excitedly, feeling happy that it was really Nani. And the black magician, visibly irritated, demanded to know how Nani dared to defy them. Bishop Rebosa felt that something had changed. The girl's magic was now directly behind her main opponents, surprising both Rebosa and Uriel, who had not realized she was there. Magic enveloped them, and Rebosa activated his own water and divine magic. He was both irritated and annoyed, wondering if this aristocrat would ever stop interfering. Meanwhile, Riley, mumbling lazily with his mouth open, watched the chaos unfold. Then, the bishop shouted for Uriel to take care of the girl first. Uriel, using fire magic, summoned a column of fire, confident that it would stop her. However, to the black magician's surprise, Nani was still standing and was not dazed. His face and body were protected by a protective cloak. Uriel was horrified, realizing that it was a fireproof cloak, which made her immune to fire. He found this impossible. Almost immediately, Nani got up and attacked the villains again. His magic swirled in a whirlwind, creating a formidable threat to the bishop and wizard. Uriel screamed in frustration, calling her a fool. He realized that if things continued like this, they would be at a disadvantage. Rebosa turned to Uriel and ordered him to wear something special. Uriel was surprised by the order, questioning whether it was worth opening a base now. Rebosa didn't respond, but ordered him to hold on for 30 seconds. Following his words, Uriel summoned something terrifying. A beast with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth began to form in the space around them. Behind Bishop Rebosa, a field of purple magic appeared, seemingly drawing out something or someone. Raleigh, who was silent, watched the sinister bishop tensely and intently. Moments later, he shouted at Nani, urging her to act quickly and end the fight. Nani, completely loyal to her master and savior, obeyed Raleigh without hesitation. She gathered her strength and prepared to do whatever was necessary to defeat her enemies. The magic swirling around him intensified, signaling a final, decisive move against the forces of darkness. Nani's magic flew towards the Black Mage and Bishop Uriel. Although Uriel managed to dodge it, he struggled mightily against the overwhelming power of Nani's energy. He called Rebosa, asking what was happening, and warned that he wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. Rebosa looked down, his expression neutral, neither sneaky nor sad. She praised Averian, saying that he had done a good job and that now everything was ready. A familiar, psychoneuronal smile appeared on the old bishop's face. He extended his filthy hand forward and ordered someone to stand before him. Everything around began to collapse. Debris flew across the road, the ground shook, and the buildings could no longer provide shelter. Frisia screamed that something was wrong with the land, while Han was more worried about his young master, shouting at him to be careful. Riley also wondered what was going on, and Nani shouted at him to come back quickly. Rebosa's face stretched into a wide, sinister smile as she commented that it was getting late. From the ground emerged a massive, incomprehensible beast with red eyes, emitting a terrifyingly strong black energy, similar to that of a bat, capable of destroying everything in its path. The monster roared loudly, and no citizen who saw it could remain silent. The creature was enormous beyond compare and looked directly at Nani and Raleigh. They were both terrified. Nani wanted to say something to her lord, but she couldn't find the words. Raleigh assumed it was a dragon, but this realization brought no comfort. Uriel wiped the sweat from her face and, satisfied, told Rebosa that it was almost ready, wondering if it could have been done more quickly. Riley, despite his fear, realized that the dragon was not perfect. He was both amazed and terrified by the fact that these subhumans could summon a creature like a dragon. Uriel was on the beast's back, laughing with her arms open, proclaiming that this was the evil curse. The black mage was clearly pleased with himself and the summoned dragon, boasting about its immense size, which completely satisfied it. Rebosa, irritated by Uriel's delay, shouted at him to stop wasting his time and get straight to the point. The protagonist understood what was happening, but still struggled to believe it. Uriel began her speech by declaring that punishment would fall on the ungrateful. Suddenly, something started to happen to the dragon. The dragon was trapped by the magical tentacles of a powerful black magician, who was squeezing him tightly. The dragon trembled all over, its red eyes losing their shine. Uriel was also trapped by the tentacles. Then, the dragon's eyes changed color, becoming a menacing purple, as frightening as the old red eyes. Uriel, in Astro's body, taunted that he should pay his debt in full, although he was not serious. Finally, the dragon's eyes glowed once more, and steam began to emanate from its body. The tentacles released their grip, freeing the dragon, who now looked even more powerful and determined, like an experienced warrior. It was then that Riley realized it wasn't just a dragon, it was an undead dragon. Nani also pondered how a creature similar to his mentor could have come so far without being able to understand. This realization saddened her deeply. The dragon opened its enormous jaws, revealing sharp white teeth as menacing as Endal's. A force spread through the city streets. Rubble from the magic tower and other destroyed buildings flew across the lower part of Solia. Riley noticed that the dragon was sucking in air. It was difficult for the protagonist to remain standing. With only a sword, a cold weapon anchored to the ground, Riley muttered to himself that this couldn't be happening. The black mage extended his magic-infused hand. With a laugh, declared that they would kill them all at once. Nani looked at the dragon in horror, remembering something important. When she remembered what it was, she refused to believe it. As her young master, she remembered Endal's warning that no matter what happened, they had to avoid the dragon's breath. Nani asked her mentor why this could not be stopped. Endal explained that only another dragon's breath could counteract him. He was serious when he said that if she couldn't dodge, she would certainly die. Nani was amazed that they, who had barely withstood the Seventh Circle Mage's attack, now faced dragon's breath. She thought it couldn't be real, but it was clear that Endal was in trouble. Astro's white beard was stained with blood, but that didn't stop his evil laugh. Blood also flowed from his eyes. The dragon continued to inhale more air and souls. Nani looked into the beast's eyes, more surprised than ever. She realized this was the end. She couldn't stop him. She looked into the black hole of lost souls and found herself unable to move. Suddenly, a familiar voice asked her why she was shaking. It was young Mr. Raleigh, standing in front of her, calm and confident, seemingly fearless. This surprised her a lot. She asked what was going on. He reassured her, asking if she remembered what he had told her. He reminded her of a time when she sat on the cold floor, wearing rags, and he reached out to her for the first time, smiling awkwardly and scratching his neck in embarrassment, promising to help her. Nani remembered everything as if it were yesterday. She wanted to defend her savior, shouting that he needed to get away, but Raleigh, more cunningly, calmly replied that it was too late. Endal, as usual, was more than a little irritated and arrogant, shouting insults and calling the situation, killing two birds with one stone, while Rebosa seemed more complacent than the black mage. Raleigh gave a loving hug to Nani, who was stunned. Without breaking the hug, he turned to her. As she looked up, she saw Raleigh smiling at her, telling her not to forget to give him that apple in the next life. Right after these words, an explosion of incredible proportions erupted. The explosion was decorated with various colors and shades of purple, and the only things visible were the black silhouettes of Raleigh and Nani. Nani, with her eyes closed, thought it was her fault. Meanwhile, she was in unbearable pain and began mentally apologizing to Miss Iris, Mr. Ian, and Miss Zera, the head maid. Uriel, with open arms, laughed and shouted at the ingrates who were now finished. Suddenly, their screams were interrupted by flying lights, like comets or rain. Rebosa silently turned to Uriah, confused by what she was seeing, and then asked the black mage, who was already furious, and shouted at the bishop, asking how he knew. In the dark sky, the red figure of a mighty dragon appeared, its spine and neck outlined against the night. He had large and powerful wings of the same red color. This huge dragon, which was not undead, hovered over Solia's lower half. It opened its mouth, revealing sharp teeth, and a ball of fire formed inside it. As the dragon began to expire, the deadly flames headed straight for the villains, meeting the purple pillar of flames of the black mage or his undead dragon. Purple and yellow sparks floated in the air, falling continuously, creating a mesmerizing yet deadly spectacle. Riley was still standing with Nani, and everything around them was enveloped in red dragon fire. Nani clung to her master, her eyes closed tightly, terrified. Riley carefully called Nani, and when she finally responded, he told her to open her eyes. Riley was surprised and relieved to see that she had no burn marks. He held Nani close, protecting her from the flames. Finally, she was free, and Nani looked very happy, thanking God that they were safe. She smiled sincerely at her savior, who looked at her with some confusion. Suddenly, someone from behind asked what they were doing. They turned around with an extremely surprised expression. It was a red dragon. He addressed Nani, reminding her that he had been clear when he told her not to give up. Nani realized that this was her mentor and was overjoyed to see him there. Meanwhile, old Bishop Rebosa was literally shaking with fear, unable to understand where the dragon had come from. Something had crossed his mind, but he refused to believe it. He remembered St. Frisia's words about the appearance of a dragon in Solia, which now made him incredibly angry. Uriah shouted at him, demanding to know why the bishop was just standing there, yelling at him to do something. Uriah was also terrified. Suddenly, Indal landed very close to Rebosa. The bishop was petrified with fear, feeling as if his body had turned to stone. Cold sweat ran down his face, and his hands shook. He thought he could barely move his arm. When he tried and his arm actually moved, Rebosa was shocked. He didn't know what to do, but a spark of hope flickered in him. He focused his gaze on his new opponent, though none of his gazes could compare to Indal's large, piercing red eyes. The dragon ordered the bishop to stand and be afraid. Rebosa was already doing it, trembling with fear. Indal then turned away, promising to deal with them later. The black mage Uriel wanted to run at Rebosa, but he stopped him, shouting at him to stay still. Rebosa explained to the black magician that the best course of action at the moment was to do nothing. Riley and Nani passed Rebosa and Uriel. Riley commented that, as a priest, Rebosa should know everything. A supposed portal in the sky where a dead dragon's head appeared still hovered, and the protagonist asked Indal what to do about it. Indal, somewhat perplexed, asked back, "Like what?" He stated that he did not know this dragon. Then, Indal used his powerful flame again. It opened its mouth, releasing a large bright flame from its mouth, and the fire seemed to swirl around the undead dragon's body. And again, the city was enveloped in a thick layer of smoke and flames. Indal, with his great claws, finished off the undead dragon with a final blow. Indal's blow was so strong that it was deafening to those watching, so much so that Nain and Raleigh had to cover their ears, with Raleigh shouting to Indal that was enough. After swinging his tail to get that filthy mana out of his body, Indal then asked if it was his turn, which scared the bishop even more. Raleigh closed his fingers and stretched a little, stepping forward with the mighty Indal walking behind him. The boy's eyes burned with intensity, almost as if he were a dragon. Rebosa began to shake again, now cursing loudly in her panic. Uriel, reluctant to back down, began shouting about what an ungrateful cheat they all were when something cut him off. Blood gushed from the wizard's body as Uriel crouched in shock, realizing that Raleigh had hit him. Uriel looked at Raleigh perplexed and told him to stop dwelling on the past. Raleigh, wielding his cool, agile weapon, said there was more to be done. He then cut Astroy, the black mage's body, in half. Uriel, still inhabiting Astroy's body, was horrified. Raleigh declared this was something Uriel had to pay for. As Uriel's body split into two, the wizard fell to the ground, already begging for something. Raleigh, uninterested in hearing his pleas, reached out and assured him that he would not let him die so easily. A golden magical field formed around Uriel. Riley said that's what he should have expected. Rebosa had completely lost his mind. Watching the scene unfold, he began to laugh slowly, a chilling sound that grew louder. Riley turned his attention to him and asked why he hesitated, warning him that he was headed down the same destructive path. The bishop's laughter turned furious, causing him to crouch, and he sarcastically asked Riley if he really thought he could stop them with that. Riley knew that Rebosa should not be underestimated, so the bishop's words made him very cautious. He mentally called the bishop an idiot and wondered if they still had an ace up their sleeve. Turning to Rebosa, Riley stated that he was going to ask him something before killing him. He demanded to know what prayer they were talking about, what it meant, and where they had gotten the dragon's corpse. Rebosa remained silent. Riley continued to press him, insisting he wanted clear answers, but Rebosa maintained his stubborn silence. after a moment. However, Rebosa smiled and let out a laugh, clearly pleased that the nobleman was finally interested in his prayer. Uriel couldn't help herself and shouted that they planned to collect people's souls and open the door to the underworld. Rebosa was very surprised by the black magician's outburst, not expecting such a confession. The black mage was terrified by pain and pure fear. The dragon's body had been given to that man. Rebosa was literally horrified. His old face contorted with all its wrinkles as he screamed, asking Uriel why he had revealed everything. At this point, Rebosa wished he could bite his own left hand in frustration. Riley ignored Rebosa's outburst and asked the black mage what they meant by the underworld. Uriel was about to explain, but realized there was no turning back. Suddenly something terrible interrupted him. Nightmarish blisters began to grow on his face. His veins felt like they were about to explode, and his skin began to crack. Uriel himself didn't understand what was happening. He groaned in pain and begged for mercy. Riley watched the black mage with incomprehension. In the end, poor Uriel was destroyed from the inside out, with blood spraying everywhere, turning everything a bright red. Even Riley's cheek was stained with blood, a sight unlike anything he had ever seen in his life. The swordsman was scandalized, and Rebosa called Uriel a drunken fool. The bishop was clearly willing to sacrifice his own allies.